Cursed. Hello, I'm Adriana High, and I chose, for my mapping project, I chose to evaluate the effects of alternative nuclear energy on fish, on aquatic life, specifically fish species in European countries. My evaluations were based off both alternative and nuclear energy sources, and all of those sources, including solar power, wind power, hydropower, nuclear, and geothermal power. So I'm mentioning this because I know it's easy to consider only nuclear power as being harmful to the environment. However, my data is including those less thought of sources, and to maintain transparency during the presentation, I did want to note that explicitly. If you guys recall, from Stephen Hill's book, Europe's Promise, in chapter 1, he discusses the magnitude of Europe's energy efficiency and conservation efforts. He also highlights some of the advantages to doing so. Specifically in Europe, he talks about how it led to the creation of new technologies and new industries, which in turn led to the creation of tens of thousands of jobs. So just to give it some class relevance and sort of bring it back to something that we discussed during the semester, I did think that this would be a suitable topic to cover. So in progressing away from non-renewable energy sources like coal, fossil fuel, oil, there are obvious advantages to the more restorable energy sources, and with that there are also a few significant setbacks, but some of those advantages include the fact that they are replenishable and that they are able to be renewed and infinite, you could say. Also, there is little to no greenhouse or net carbon emissions, and some of the other benefits include our economic benefits, like what Stephen Hill discussed, and the creation of jobs. However, there are some aspects of alternative energy that can be harmful to aquatic life. Some of those include fish impingement by diverting natural surface water. Fish can also be killed or injured by turbine blades used to power hydroelectricity. Obviously the disturbance and movement and growth of fishes and other marine life. Global warming emissions are produced during the constructions of electric power plants. Water flowing through dams can collect nitrogen, which can be harmful to fish populations. The big controversial disadvantage comes from nuclear power plants that utilize a once-through cooling system. Its disruption of habitat happens during both the intake and discharge of water. The cooling systems are installed with filters that are supposed to prevent large objects and fishes from being pulled into the cooling system. But some small aquatic life are able to fit through and are killed during the intake process. Other fish are trapped inside the filters. Now, in addition to that, the water that's released back into the ocean is up to 25 degrees warmer than it was originally. So the warmer water kills some fish and forces other fish to look for cooler waters. Warmer water also attracts non-native aquatic life who often die from cold shock once the cooling system is no longer in use. So this slide contains a quote from an article. Researchers conducted a study of the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden to determine how it was impacting fish impingements. So essentially, they determined that there were an awful lot of fish being impinged, and the article actually did offer a potential solution to the issue. This is a picture of fish that are being impinged. So it is clearly not a comfortable or positive situation for them to be in. So we can first look at the alternative energy map. So this is a map that I created with my data. The lighter colors indicate a low LQ, while the darker colors signify a higher LQ. You'll notice that among the high LQs is Iceland. So actually, almost 100% of Iceland's electricity comes from alternative energy sources. The majority of that from hydropower, with another sizable portion that comes from geothermal energy. Iceland is considered a pioneer in the use of geothermal energy. Spain is among the low LQs, even though in 2013, wind accounted for over 20% of Spain's total energy use, and Spain has one of the largest solar industries in the world. But a more comprehensive look shows that, in fact, it's just a small fraction of the total energy consumption. So I was initially surprised by my data, especially after finding this map of nuclear power plants in Europe. So even though there seems to be a sort of concentrated or saturated amount of power plants in some of those same countries, on my map you'll find that they have a low LQ. And that just goes back to the fact that my research does include those other alternative energy sources as well. So this is the map that I created for the fish species threatened. Just to give you guys some perspective of fish, it's estimated that there are about 30,000 to 40,000 fish species in the world. There are about 900 species found in the Mediterranean. And for instance, in Poland, there's only 8 species that are threatened or endangered. So I say this just because there are a lot of fish. So I don't believe we're in any shortage of fish, or of fish species for that matter. So among the low LQs for the fish species threatened is the Czech Republic. And in my research, I found that experts refer to the Czech Republic as the roof of Europe, and because of its location, no major rivers flow through the Czech Republic. It's also not adjacent to any ocean water. There is a high importance placed on reservoirs in the Czech Republic, the most important being artificial lakes that are built in enclosed river valleys. There are 150 of those in the Czech Republic. The establishment of artificial bodies of water is sort of a tradition that dates back to the Middle Ages, when there were a large number of fish ponds created in the Czech Republic. However, since then, only about a quarter of those fish ponds remain. So, as well as being amongst the high for LQs and alternative energy use, Iceland also has a high LQ for the fish species threatened, and I didn't necessarily find this surprising, just because of its competitiveness in the seafood industry. Iceland is also a premier travel destination for those of us who really like to catch or really like to eat fish. And this is a side-by-side comparison. So just looking at this, I don't see any real correlation. I mean, there are a few countries that remain consistent, but it's more or less sporadic. So some of those that are included that were consistent, like we discussed, Iceland was high in both categories. Germany was low in both categories. Just to give you an idea. So there were quite a few variables that I did not consider. Some of those including the country's proximity to water, prevalence of hunting fish for food and sport fishing, and the fish's ability to quickly restore their population. So these are things that I did not account for. Had I did so, I would have maybe found different conclusions. So Kanye kind of describes how I feel about the results of my research. There just weren't any significant relationship or correlation just based off looking at the maps. So, and the following is some of the data, the links to the data that I used during the presentation. So, thank you all very much for your time.